Our court, I just remind you, electronic devices, all electronic devices should be switched off, excluding the tablet devices you're using to view your committee pack. Members, a brief overview of today's business. We'll have a departmental briefing on the update of savings delivery plans, a departmental briefing on the employment bill, and a departmental briefing on the review of youth training the way forward. Members, apologies that I have at the minute are Mr Phil Flanagan, Mr Pat Ramsey, Mr David Hilditch. Any more apologies? Okay, members, under chairperson's business, there's none. Draft minutes. The draft minutes of our last meeting, 29th of April, are page 7 of your packs. Members, do you agree there was a true record of that meeting? Yep, intend that I sign as such. Members, matters arising. Matters arising are at page 12 of your pack as the agreed action points. From the committee, can I just highlight at page 12 is the clerk's memo regarding the Public Services of Persons Bill. Our members content that the committee write to Queen's University of Belfast, the Ulster University and the Open University and colleges NI to seek their views in the bill, because there is, I think it's section 8 refers to 18.
Yeah. This is for the NIPSO bills.
Yep.
I think they did make submissions to it.
Right.
Yeah, but if they want to give us anything.
Three us. Fra.
Sure, it was just, I think it was at the last meeting, I think through the chair and other members they raised the question of dates.
Some correspondence.
Coming up again.
And it's coming up again.
Correspondence.
And Queen students have, student union, they have written to me as well on
Right.
the bill. Yeah.
We could ask them further.
Yeah.
For them input as well.
Okay.
Okay, members agreed.
And USI.
Members agreed. Okay, members, just to note that the committee clerk has discussed the issue of tabling the amendment to the Special Education Needs and Disability Bill with the bill clerk, and has been advised that the committee should write to the department to seek its views regarding the option to statement young people up to 25 years old, just to as the next step, I suppose, before we go to tabling possible amendments.
You may be pushing an open door on some of the stuff.
That's it. But I think it's more process rather than that. Members, moving on then, correspondence. Members, two main pieces of correspondence I want to deal with are tabled, mostly tabled at page 4, is the correspondence from the Training for Women's Network regarding the European Social Funding application and the appeals process. Members, are we content that we forward this to the department for answers to their questions?
Yes.
Your members content? Okay, members, then, as Fra was reading, tabled at page 9 is correspondence from the BICE project.
Sure.
Regarding
Sorry, it's just to take a step back. I have been talking to some groups who fell foul of the thing, and I think you have a motion coming up in the Assembly. And to find out if there's been any analysis done, especially in around that broad women's sector, on the impact that it will have, and especially the clientele that they deal with, which is mostly NEETs. And I know that my colleague here has raised the fact of the impact that it would have west of the Bond, and the need to find out all that information. So
we could ask that too, because I think we have said that the committee will look deeper into ESF once we get the final outcome. Table to page 9 is correspondence from the BITES project regarding the funding. Again, members, would you be agreed that we forward this to the Minister for immediate comment?
Yeah.
Members, just pointing these two pieces of correspondence on something that I suppose I want to say as chair on them. We've had representation from department officials in regard to both ESF and the BICE funding, but it seems very much that what we're being told in here about follow-up meetings and correspondence and communication doesn't follow on from the department and the organisations after they leave this room, because it's evident from both these pieces of correspondence where meetings and updates have been promised that actually haven't happened. So I think it's something we need to raise as a general issue, I think, with the Minister and the department, that if officials are telling us something in this committee, we expect the decency that they actually go out and deliver on that.
Sure, and even at that, Bates had approached the Minister and a senior official after the last meeting, and again, there was an understanding there that somebody would get back to them.
Yeah. I've raised the bikes issue with the Minister yesterday in conversation, and he says there'll be an answer back to the committee within a week. So it's not what we were told the last time, where it seemed to be it would be a lot quicker than that, but there is going to be an answer, whether it's members in those two pieces of correspondence. Okay,
Yeah.
content?
Yes.
Members' actions are suggested agreed unless indications to the contrary. Okay. Members, at page 107 and tabled are 4 invitation listed. If members wish to attend any of these events, can you inform the committee staff who will make the necessary arrangements? Members, the invite at page 107 is an invitation from Belfast Met to the Transatlantic Technology and Training Alliance Conference for 2015. Is that a Monday or
Monday
Tuesday?
the other
It's a Monday. Would be members content, if possible, that our research officer attend on behalf of the committee just to get feedback?
Yeah.
Content? Okay, members, moving on then, draft forward work programme is at page 113 of your packs. Members, as we have at the minute, Cathy, do you want to say anything? We can-
We have down for, I'm just looking to see where it is, 3rd of June we have departmental briefing structured to deliver success. It has been suggested by the department that we will receive this paper in advance, either next week or the following week. There's over 40 plus different strategies, and it's difficult to talk about them all, or to have like speed dating at the bottom of the table here where you have the different policy leads coming up and talking about it. So it's been suggested that we receive the paper, we look at it in advance, discuss it at a meeting and decide what specific strategies you want to be briefed on. Instead of getting a very high level overview of them all, you can get specifics and down into the detail of the ones that you're interested in. So we'll be getting that either next week's meeting or the following week, and then have the briefing on 3rd of June. If there's too many strategies to deal with in one briefing session, we'll have more than one briefing session. We can spread it over a number of weeks.
Sure.
Okay, members content?
Content, yeah.
Okay, members, our draft work programme is agreed. Okay, members, moving on, I think Cathy referred to as speed dating. I think that's what we're moving into now. And our next departmental briefing session is the update on the savings deliveries plan. Members, this is page 116, the departmental briefing paper on the savings delivery plan. The committee will be briefed on the savings deliveries plan in 2 groups, and the first group will cover B1, B2, B5, B6, B7, B8 and B9. So could I just welcome Heather Cousins, Deputy Secretary, Stephen Murray, Director of Finance, Billy Little, Head of Higher Education Finance, and Mr Michael Campbellson, Head of Further Education Finance and Funding. Is that as expected? I see a few confused faces down there. Is that all right?
Good morning, Chair, members.
Heather.
Thank you very much for inviting us here today to talk to you about the Savings Delivery Plan. As you said, we have a cast of thousands, which we've split into 2 groups. So Stephen and I will be here for both sets of briefings. When Michael and Billy have delivered their bit, they will go back to the gallery, and the other Michael and Brendan will come and deal with B3 and B4. So bear with us, it could get a little bit confusing, but we'll do our best. We're going to cover all of the savings delivery plans today, so that's B1 through to B10. I'm going to give the highlights of each plan, and then the other officials will give more of the detail. So if we start with B1, in relation to B1, that's the carry forward savings from 2010 to 11. The main point to highlight from this is that these savings had been identified prior to the last spending review, and we were then able to utilise them in our baseline as cuts. Savings Plan B2 is a saving of 8.5 million, which was money that the department had in its baseline, which it hadn't allocated to individual programmes. And we took the decision that as the money was not allocated to any specific programmes, it would be the contribution to departmental savings. The third plan, B3, is in relation to reduced commitments in employment provision.
So Heather, are you covering B3 now, or do you want
I'm
to do
just
this
doing a high level, here's
Okay,
the highlights of each one, and then we'll go through the detail. So B3 is in relation to reduced commitments and employment provision, and the main area where this was achieved was by reducing various programmes, including the Back to Work strand of the Steps to Work programme and the Skills Development strand of Steps to Work. In Plan B4, reduced commitment to training was delivered through Skills and Industry and Strategy European and Employment Relations divisions. The Strategy European and Employment Relations division delivered savings of 0.6 million, with Skills and Industry delivering the remainder. Most notably, a revised policy change to 50% funding retained for adult apprentices achieved savings of 4.7 million in 2014-15. A further policy change of 50% funding for adult apprentices following a priority sector apprenticeship achieved savings of 0.44 million. And again, later Michael will talk about the impact of that. In relation to B5, pay and price restraint, some 46 million was achieved in 2014-15 through absorbing inflation within existing baselines in both the department and its arm's length bodies, and pay increases being met with arm's length bodies' own budget allocations. For Savings Plan B6, higher education budget easements refers to funding for activities which were ongoing in 2010-11 and which ceased or finished by the 31st of March 2011, and that was no longer required. The funding associated with the activities was therefore removed from the higher education baseline moving forward. The activities in question were 5.8 million in respect of the strengthening the All-Ireland research base, 2 million allocated for student finance, and 0.2 million in respect of funding additional PhD students at the two universities. And Billy will talk about that later. Plan B7 relates to further education colleges. The further education budget was not cut in the last spending review. To generate efficiencies, the colleges were asked to deliver more provision for the same funding. Specifically, 4 million of additional unfunded provision was provided per year over the 4-year period, cumulatively representing a target of 16 million across the 4-year spending review period. In relation to B8, which is higher education, to achieve the savings, the block grant payable to the 4 higher education institutions in Northern Ireland was reduced over the 4 years, culminating in 2014-15. This decrease in block grant was applied equally across the sector and in percentage terms was just in excess of 15%. The institutions were able to absorb the savings without impacting their frontline services, which in this case is the number of students that they enrolled and the number of qualifications awarded. And again, Billy will speak more about that later. Plan B9 relates to the notional loan subsidy. This subsidy represents the cost to government of issuing student loans. It estimates the opportunity cost of charging interest below the market rate and the likely value of loans which will be written off in the future. The requirement for the notional loan subsidy for 14-15 was higher than projected, but the difference was made up by additional Treasury funding. The final plan B10 is in relation to staffing and accommodation efficiencies. This is a part of an efficiency programme across all of our divisions, whereby we task the divisions to contribute to £5 million worth of savings over 4 years. Those savings reflect some reductions in posts, which we monitor on an annual basis. There were also some accommodation savings. For example, we closed the Office of the Employment and Skills Advisor earlier in period. So that was a quick run through the highlights of each of the plans. And we'll now take questions on the individual savings plans, starting with Stephen for B1, B2, B5, B9.
Yes. Chair, if I could just give a wee bit more detail on what Heather was saying there briefly. Just in relation to B1, as Heather mentioned, those were carried forward savings from broadly 4 years ago. I think what happened back then was George Osborne came in as the new Chancellor and immediately introduced some spending cuts within that first year. For us as a department, those were worth 6 million. Of those 6 million, we identified 3 million that we could actually roll forward into future years. So our baseline was reinstated the next year by 6 million, but we were able to save 3 million that we had previously identified, and we were able to carry that forward, and that was sort of quite low-hanging fruit in terms of the first port of call for the overall savings plan for the 4 years. In terms of B2 then, again, as Heather mentioned, that there was an amount of 8.5 million which wasn't allocated to any specific projects, and that was something that was quite typical of the department back in those years, whereby we had money to use, you know, if there was big swings on employment levels or inward investment, or we wanted to fund PhD places or something like that, that the Minister had the scope to use these funds to do that. So 8.5 million of those were used for the savings delivery plan. Obviously that wasn't exactly the thing that we wanted to do at the time, because that restricted the Minister. But having said that, looking back at the last 4 years, there's a number of funds that did come into the department for the Youth Employment Scheme, for the Economy and Jobs Initiatives for Pathways, and you'll all be well aware of those. And those did provide new funding over that period of time. And the last area I just want to cover in this first bit is pay and price restraint, where there was 46 million in last year, which was a cumulative effect of all of the 4 years, which built up to 46 million. We did get that money back from DFP, but didn't allocate it specifically for pay and price. But again, used it for other things that the department had as priority. So that was a big part of the savings delivery plan. But as I say, we did get the money back into the coffers to support our overall budget. So happy enough to take any questions on those.
Stephen, sorry, on the pay and price restraint, sorry, just go over that in detail maybe a wee bit more in regards to pay and price coming back from DFP.
Yes, what happened there, Chair, was in the sort of initial part of the budget, departments were told there wouldn't be anything for pay and price in terms of allocations, but then subsequently there was. So monies did come back into the departments for pay and price, but in terms of arm's length bodies, in particular, we didn't allocate that out. They consumed their own smoke, so to speak, in terms of any pay increases that they meted out of their budget without any additional allocation.
So the pay and price wasn't passed on to arm's length bodies, but was it utilised within the department for pay increases? Or?
Yes, and I suppose indirectly went back to particularly HE and FE for other initiatives that were required.
Is that at the discretion? I'm just trying to get my head around if that money was delivered by DFP for a specific purpose for pay and price. Is the flexibility within the department, within the Minister's control? Where does that flexibility come in not to use it for what it was designated for?
Well, it's like the overall budget, Chair. It's the department decides in terms of the allocation of that, obviously in consultation with all the relevant stakeholders, but the final decision is taken from the department's perspective.
46.1 million come back into
That's cumulative over the 3 years. So, I mean, each year there's a particular increase, is broadly 6% overall.
Okay. Members, any questions on those 4 savings delivery plans? No? Okay. Thanks, Stephen. Heather, do you want to?
Okay, hand over to Ben.
Okay, thanks. I'll start first with Savings Plan B6. Now, this one's very straightforward because this refers to activities which were ongoing in 10-11 and which ceased or finished by the 31st of March 2011, and they were no longer required. And the biggest element of that was the projects undertaken under strengthening the All-Ireland research base, which were collaborative research projects between institutions in Northern Ireland and the Republic. There were 20 projects in total. The funding for these came from the Funding for Innovation stream, and that ceased at the 31st of March 2011. So those projects and that programme ceased as well. However, since that, there is a continuation of North-South research collaboration under different streams of research funding, which are currently ongoing, and they're being funded from the grant or the block that we have now. It's not restricted funding like FFI funding in the past.
Okay.
So that's B6.
Yeah.
Okay. Chair, just on B6, Was that B6, was there £2 million student finance included in that? Did I
There
pick
was
up somewhere?
There was £2 million allocation for student finance for
What
activities.
effect or knock-on is that having?
That had no knock-on effect on the students at all. The students continue to be financed either through the grant or maintenance loans. The only thing that has changed over recent years in student finance is that the EMA, the Education Maintenance Allowance, has been decreased, but that's not related to that as far as I know.
Not related?
No.
Oh, no change there.
Sorry? No, there's no change, no.
Okay.
Of those research projects, because they were cross-border, Billy, is there any opportunity for international funding? Is there any European funding that can be picked up to carry out similar projects or continue it?
Well, the international funding that they're getting at the moment is under US-Ireland research funding. So there's actually money coming from the Science Foundation Ireland, Dell itself, and US financing. Now, that's ongoing. As regards European funding, we have put funding into the universities to help them maximise the amount of funding that they can extract from Europe, particularly for research purposes. And I think that's called Horizon 2020. But I don't have the detail with me on
Right, okay,
what's
that's all right.
involved in that.
Okay, members, anyone else in those? Okay, Heather, do you want to?
Okay, so
If we go on then to B8,
Yeah.
and that saving was branded as an operational efficiency in the sector. And as Heller said, the achieved efficiencies, the block grant to the 4 institutions in Northern Ireland was reduced over the 4-year period, and the savings were applied equally across the sector to all institutions. The percentage increase in block grant itself over the 4 years was just in excess of 15%. Now that ignores inflation, so the real reduction to the sector was higher than that. So although we reduced the funding to the institutions, we wanted the institutions to continue with their frontline activities, i.e. student numbers and number of qualifications delivered. And the institutions have been able to absorb those costs and move forward without impacting on these frontline services. And there's a few statistics we can give you just to back that up. So the following figures come from HESA, the Higher Educational Statistical Agency. So between 10-11, and that's the base year against which performance is being compared, and 13-14, which was the last year for which we have a full set of statistics, the number of full-time first-year, first-degree enrolments in Northern Ireland institutions of Northern Ireland students increased from 8,850 to 9,620. So that's an increase of 8.7% in their enrolments of Northern Ireland students over the first 3 years of the 4-year period. As well as that, the increase in the total first-year enrolments in all modes of study, which includes full-time and part-time, of Northern Ireland students, increased by over 10%. So that went from 9,680 to 10,655. So in the terms of throughput of students, despite the 15% reduction, the institutions were still able to increase by 10% the number of students going through the system. And if we look at qualifications then obtained over the same period, if we compare 13-14 to 10-11, the number of full-time first-degree qualifications obtained by Northern Ireland domiciled students rose by 7.3%. So that was 6,740 up to 7,235. So not only did the throughput increase, but also the amount of qualifications delivered also increased. And the story is even better when you look at the projected performance of Northern Ireland institutions compared to the UK average. The UK average of full-time students starting first degree courses expected to qualify at the end of the period is 81.8%. However, in Northern Ireland, that figure is 84.3%. So you can say that in Northern Ireland, a higher number of students are expected or anticipated to qualify than elsewhere in the UK. In the same period, if you look at postgraduate qualifications, both full-time and part-time, that rose by 4.6%. It went from 3,010 to 3,150 over the period. And finally, if you look at participation in underrepresented groups, And we're talking here about NSSEC Group 4 to 7. The UK average is 32.6%, whereas in Northern Ireland, the institutions have achieved 39.5%. So again, when we compare Northern Ireland, across the years in which we were making the reductions, the number of people coming from those SEC groups 4 to 7 was higher than was achieved elsewhere in the UK. So what I'm trying to show there is simply that despite the reductions in the funding, the institutions with fewer resources from the public sector were able to move forward and increase the throughput in students, increase the qualifications and maintain a higher representation of the lower represented socioeconomic groups.
Okay, thanks. But I think there's a phrase about statistics that I'll not use maybe in what you're presenting to us today.
I know the one you're referring to.
I think one of the problems here, when we're looking at the savings plan, it is the savings plan for up to 2015, so it's not really taking into account the budget cuts that have been forced onto higher and further education and coming on. Just, Heather, is there any targets set for 15-16 yet?
In what sense?
In regards to saving plans, deliveries, or how these will be met?
Well, you will already know that the reduction in higher education funding has gone down by 16.1% in the sector. And the institutions have indicated that that will result in fewer places and in job losses. But we haven't yet, as a department, I think, developed the savings delivery plans to deliver that.
To actually reflect that and how it'll look. I suppose it's just really saying, Billy, I know you're saying the institutions have been able to absorb those savings.
So far, yes.
Because they were planned over that period of time, whereas they're looking actually to a larger savings, or a larger reduction, sorry, in their core funding in a 1-year period, which is your feeling that any of the advances in progression and numbers that you're reporting us today will be severely affected by what's happening in this financial year?
Well, I think there's no doubt that there will be an impact. The impact already is that the institutions have indicated as far back as last November that there could be up to 1,000 places not available in the 15-16 year. Since that, Queen's have announced that the actual number that they're not offering next year is 290 places, and we expect the University of Ulster to come in at a figure around or slightly below that. So in the first year, 15-16, we could be looking at between 500 and 600 places not being offered, and that will impact mostly on Northern Ireland domiciled students. As you go forward in the next couple of years, that number will rise to well over 1,000 and could approach 1,500. So yes, the figures will be impacted by the current budgetary situation.
Okay. Fran?
Sure, I have to say the figures are impressive, but and it's always good to hear. Just a couple of questions. To see when you talk about the socioeconomic background of the students, are you able to determine the geographical spread of where them students come from?
Well, all the students in the system, as far as I understand it, their home addresses are there and their postcodes, so it can be drilled down to street level.
It would be interesting, because I think one of the things that we have looked at in the past is how you encourage people from the most socially deprived communities across the north in the education, and it would be good to see that with increased figures whether we're having the desired impact on those things. The second one question was, and they say that the figures are impressive, is that individual students attend, or does that break down into multiple degrees?
No, I think we're talking about individual students.
No, somebody may go for 2 degrees, or is that?
No, the figures we're talking about here are enrolments in first degree.
What's that sound?
First year students. We can break it down into first year students, full time, part time, or all students, and at different levels, postgraduate, undergraduate, other undergraduate as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anna?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, I think we need to congratulate the institutions and the universities for doing so well. the last few years, with the reduction of, 15%?
Yeah.
And to be able to achieve the number of the students and the qualifications. Are you saying they're all homegrown students? Are you counting overseas students as well?
Oh, yes,
number there.
overseas students are in the numbers.
In
but
the
the
numbers,
funding
is it?
provided by the department from the executive is only to fund domiciled students in Northern Ireland, so it's for Northern Ireland students.
Those are,
And other EU students, international students and students from GB are self-funding and they're not supported by the funding we have.
they're not counted in this.
No,
Okay.
but we do have the numbers.
Okay. Are you aware of how they manage over the last few years of reduction in income and yet to be able to provide the same frontline services?
They're doing that through efficiency programs that they're running themselves. And we have information from all 4 institutions for the first 3 years up to July 14, which shows very clearly that the institutions across a number of areas have saved, around £35 million in efficiencies. And they've reported that to us.
And what type of efficiencies?
It ranges from...
Administration staff? Or?
It ranges from staff. So there have been voluntary exits, early severance schemes in place. There've been no compulsory redundancies. They have made savings through more efficient use of procurement and collaborative procurement approaches. They've made savings through reductions in their academic and individual departmental school budgets. And I'm trying to think where else they came from.
Are they thinking of use of fuel or environmental savings? And
Yes, they have done
there's
that
such
as well.
big, huge estate premises.
And they have retendered and achieved savings through, for example, electricity contracts. But the institutions, particularly the universities, are very mindful of their CO2 emissions. And they do have the statistics to show that they are driving those down as well. And there is a requirement under the Climate Act to get down to a particular level by 2020.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Okay, folks.
Okay, Michael.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I would like to give an update on B7, which is operational efficiency and further education. It's probably worth pointing out, Chair, that the FE budget wasn't actually cut in the last spending review. So to generate efficiencies, the FE colleges were asked to deliver more provision, but for the same funding. Specifically, they were set a target of delivering an additional £4 million per year of additional unfunded provision over the 4-year period. So cumulatively across the 4-year period, it represented a target of an extra £16 million of extra unfunded provision. So we'd refer to this as over-delivery. But effectively, we're talking about additional student enrolments here. So year 1 was 11-12 and year 4 was 14-15. We're currently still in year 4 in terms of the academic year, because it doesn't end until sort of late summer 14-15. So we currently don't have end of year data for year 4. However, for years 1 to 3, the value of the over delivery was as follows. So in 11-12, the amount of over delivery was 5 million. In 12-13, it was 6 million. And in 13-14, it was 2 million. So across the years 1 to 3, that added up to £13 million of over delivery. So the efficiency target is currently on track to either being delivered or to being substantially delivered. Some additional information by way of context. Student enrolment numbers in the FE colleges have increased. So between 11-12 and 13-14, the numbers of regulated student enrolments increased by almost 1,000. FE colleges get their funding from several sources, but including, for example, fee income, but the main funding is in the form of the annual block grant from Dell, which has been frozen for the last number of years. However, apart from the block grant, there are some additional smaller sources of FE funding. So, for example, Training for Success has decreased over the last number of years. In 10-11, Training for Success was 32 million for the FE colleges, and then last year that dropped to 29 million. Then they also get some funding from the Department of Education for the entitlement framework. So in 10-11 it was 8 million, but in the current year that's dropped to 6 million. It's also worth highlighting that over the last 8 years, inflation cumulatively over an 8-year period has been running roughly about 20% cumulatively over the 8-year period, and now in terms of pay and prices, and that's more or less been absorbed by the 6 FE colleges. Staff numbers have been decreasing in the FE colleges. So just to give an example, in 09-10 there were 4,700 staff in the 6 FE colleges, and in 13-14 that dropped to 4,100. There's been increasing collaboration, for example in terms of shared back office, shared services, IT, course development, etc. So those sorts of examples of collaboration have helped deliver efficiencies and sort of reduce costs. It's also worth highlighting as part of the context, the merger. So it wasn't that long ago, back in 2007, that the FE colleges merged. It went from 16 to 6. So I suppose this is a continuous journey of more and more efficiency. So to conclude, over the last number of years, the block grant has been frozen. In fact, there's been reduced funding from other sources. For example, I mentioned Training for Success and the funding from DE. Inflation and pay and prices has been absorbed. There's been fewer staff and efficiencies have had to be made. But despite these factors, the colleges have still managed to over-deliver. So, to summarise, the colleges have delivered more in terms of student enrolments, but with less funding and with less staff.
Michael, how do you measure this 5-6 million over commitment or over delivery? Is it basically in student numbers?
We have a unit of resource called a funded learning unit, or FLUs. So there's quite good management information reported throughout the year, and in terms of student enrolments, and that's more or less converted into like a monetary value of, over delivery. So that's sort of monitored throughout the year. So that's how we know.
So your thousand, I think you said you had 1,000 additional students enrolled. Are those full-time, part-time?
It'd be a mixture.
Mixture. And I'm just trying to get at, could a college enrol 800 part-time students and increase their FLU value
it would have been
on paper without actually delivery?
No, there was genuine. It would have been increased student enrolments. It would have been a mixture.
Right. When it comes now to, I suppose, the next stage, the 15-16 cuts, is it just a simple matter of reduction for colleges to cut back on that overspend to their original 10-11 position?
Yeah, I mean, over the last 4 years, it is a very positive story in terms of like over delivery against reduced resources. Going forward, it's going to be much more severe. As it stands at the minute, there's cuts of £12 million been imposed off the block grant in 15-16, so that will have quite a detrimental impact in terms of student numbers and staff. Still working with colleges to impact that more fully, but it will be very severe.
As you see, whereas colleges have been allowed to over-delivery and claim that as investment rather than savings, I suppose, using department language, as I say, next year they just stop over-delivering.
Very much so. In fact, it's going the other way. It'll be a cut.
Right.
Cut in funding, and because it's like a double whammy between the reduced funding and inescapable pressures, such as like pensions increases and inflation and pay and prices. Because the double whammy, it will be reduced student enrolments.
Okay. In regard to entitlement framework funding then coming from DE, is that going to be hit further?
It probably will be. The trend, Chair, over the last number of years has been that's been gradually decreasing. So I would imagine the trend would continue.
Right. Is there any stage a college can say, look, this is no longer worth our while to deliver entitlement framework courses for some of the local schools and simply remove themselves from that offer?
Presumably there would be a tipping point that would get reached, Chair, yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Sydney?
Yeah, Michael, thank you. You certainly paint a very good picture here in the figures, but the chair's touched on it. 1,000 more increased places, 600 less staff, and that's been done with a frozen block grant and less funding and whatever. But you touched on the word I think you mentioned was severe going forward. We're going from a position of a very good position. How quickly do you think this is going to kick into a sort of a severe situation? Is it going to be 15, 16? And what impact or how many places do you envisage going to be lost, student places? How many staff do you think is going to be lost to the colleges?
In terms of students...
Just looking at your opinion, like,
just to get an idea.
going from this position to what do we have facing us down the line?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, we're still impacting this, so it's a fluid situation. We've recently been having bilateral meetings with the 6 colleges, to discuss their budget and discuss the initial views on the possible impact. So, in terms of like a worst case impact of the 12 million budget cut, could be talking about a reduction of 26,000 part-time students in 15-16. And what I would add is about half of that would be leisure and hobbies, part-time students, roughly half of that. In terms of staff impacts, Colleges NI released a press release a number of weeks ago indicating that there could be of the order of 500 staff released under the public sector voluntary exit scheme. So those are the sort of figures in terms of the impacts. But
you would call them severe, yeah.
It's very, very, very severe, but it is fluid at the minute. The figures are still being refined.
Right. Yep. Okay.
Anna?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, again, I think a very good picture, and FG colleges are to be congratulated. You said over delivery of 13 million, an increase of student numbers by 1,000. Do you also look at the outcome? And these are student enrollments.
Yes.
What about, at the end of it, do they get the qualifications?
Yes. Excuse me. Over the last number of years, as part of the funding the funding model that is in place, we apply what's known as a quality performance adjustment, the QPA, and what that is, it links the funding with the outcomes. So it's basically set to pass rates of 60% or higher, and if the numbers of pass rates are less than 60%, then there's a clawback in terms of the funding. That funding model has been quite successful over the last number of years. The outcomes has been quite positive. I don't actually have the figures in front of me in terms of the pass rates, but retention levels have been very high.
What is it? What's the retention level?
Certainly in the 90% sort of and above. And outcomes have been similar in terms of the percentages that are in the 60% pass rates or higher. Again, they're in the 90s. I don't have the specific figures, but I can certainly get those for you if you want.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. Yeah. And also, those are all academic courses, is that right? Do you include the leisure courses like gardening or?
In terms of the outcomes, that's down to accredited provision. Okay. And the vast bulk of provision is accredited provision. The leisure and hobbies is sort of non-accredited, and it wouldn't be applied to that.
Thanks, Anna. Claire?
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for coming in late. I suppose if the budget cuts are seemingly making staff cuts and course cuts inevitable, do you have any idea at this stage of how and where you will apply these cuts across the 6 colleges? I suppose to give you background to what I'm asking is, if it's based on numbers, i.e. bumps on seats, how many students are attending those colleges presently, will that then reflect on the cuts for staff in those colleges? And I suppose I'm concerned about that because there are some colleges across Northern Ireland that require a new build, and you probably know which one I'm referring to. And that in itself would have an impact on numbers because the facility isn't there currently. So I'm just curious to know how they will be applied or how you feel you would approach that.
What the Minister decided in discussions with the colleges would be a combination of sort of top-down and bottom-up. In terms of top-down, it was the department's views of the priorities and what were the more priorities and what were the arguably less painful areas to cut, and then a bit of bottom-up, letting the colleges decide based on the local needs. So in terms of top-down, there's £2 million of the subsidy, the government subsidy for leisure and hobby was removed. It was deemed to be lesser priority. The Learner Access and Engagement Programme, which was funded by 1.3 million a year, was stopped. Essential Skills, the funding for that was cut by £500,000, although the context of that was demand had been falling the last number of years for essential skills, so that was taken into account. And there was also a cut made regarding the harmonisation of full-time HE fees of 700 grand, and then the rest balance of the cuts was left to colleges to decide, so based on their local assessment of their priorities locally. That was kind of the approach.
Okay. I suppose what I'm saying that, you know, in all the areas that you've outlined, that would there would probably be elements of that in each college, and I'm just, you know, concerned, is there an approach in terms of the current numbers there? But
that's still kind of being impacted at the minute. We're having sort of ongoing discussions with the colleges about that.
Okay.
So the impact locally in each college in terms of staffing and students are still discussing that.
Will it be a consideration, however, that the current facilities may have an impact on those numbers if that's going to be the case? And can we, like, I'm concerned that in my area, you know, we have a college that does need a new build and people are not attending that college because the facility isn't there. And I wouldn't like to think that, you know, because of that, we're going to then be a detriment in terms of...
No, I wouldn't. There would be no detrimental impact there, you know.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
If there's no other questions, I'll
Sorry,
pass.
Bronwyn, just...
Thank you for your presentation. Regarding the cuts to the leisure and hobbies, which you define as non-accredited courses, I would be concerned about the impact on special needs. And will there be a full EQAA carried out on that? Because provision at the minute is very limited for special needs, very, very limited. So I would be concerned regarding that non-accredited courses.
The total annual DEL subsidy for non-accredited or sort of recreational was £3 million a year, and of that 3 million, 1 million was for sort of special needs, and that's actually been ring-fenced and protected, at least for 15-16.
Right.
So the 2 million cut that I was referring to is excluding the special needs categories.
Okay.
Because the Minister obviously regarded those as, you know, he wanted to give that protection.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So if there's no, I'll pass.
Michael, just wanted to come back on your over delivery across all the colleges. How was that managed? Was each college set a target to over deliver?
Yes, Chair, there were targets set and then they were monitored during the year. There was data lifts were taken at different intervals each year and then monitored accordingly.
Did each college meet their targets of over delivery? I'm thinking in relation to flu.
It would have been a little bit fluid. Some of them would have been better than others. So whenever I give the figures year on year, they were sort of fluid year on year, and also there's fluidity across the 6 colleges as well.
That's right.
Some colleges you would imagine are a little bit more efficient than others, so that would be reflected in the delivery performance.
Okay. Sorry, you wanted to finish on something, Michael?
No, just if there was no more. I wasn't sure if there was no more questions. I would pass back to Stephen.
Okay, Chair. I just do the last bit of this session before others join the table. It's on the national loan subsidy element, which is, to be honest, is the most complex bit of the whole thing because the area itself is complex. It's administered by GB on our behalf. It's whilst it's part of our budget, it does sort of slightly sit outside it because it's a different type of budget. It comes about for 2 particular reasons. It's because, in terms of loans being subsidised, it's the difference between the sort of what people pay and what's the commercial rate at the time, and more importantly, it takes into account what we call impairments, and that's really loans not being repaid in line with forecasts for the overall repayments. For last year, it actually turned out that our baseline overall wasn't enough to cover the total amount that was required, and this has happened previously as well. What happens in that case is DFP on our behalf negotiate with Treasury, because this is a GB-wide issue, not just a Northern Ireland issue. And we did submit a bid, and that bid was met to cover the total amount of funding that was required for last year for the no-fault loan subsidy. So whilst in previous years we did make up some shortfall, last year was a different story, and it wasn't just as good news a story. But I think Treasury and DFP are well aware of this issue, and it needs to be very carefully monitored going forward, as potentially more loans don't get repaid in the future. But there is a certain element of risk associated with it.
And we're completely in the hands of Treasury over that?
We have to bid for what we have done for 15-16 is agreed a higher level of baseline, which is circa 140 million. And that's in line with current forecasts. So we're hoping that it will come in very close to that this year. But certainly for last year there was a shortfall.
Okay, so the indication would be if the loans aren't being repaid as increasing year on year, it means the graduates aren't getting the jobs that are attracting the salaries to repay those loans, is that?
Yes, I mean that would be one element, or people going abroad, and there's they don't get repaid that way either. So there's a number of elements to it, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Stephen.
Chair, just that baseline, Stephen, 140 million.
Yes.
How does that compare with previous years? Maybe I didn't pick up on that.
Previous year was 100 million, so it has gone up by 40 million.
40 million.
15-16, yes.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Okay, if that's all further in higher education questions, Billy and Michael can go. If we can welcome Michael and Brendan.
Yep. Members, just welcome Brendan McCann, who's the head of new employment team, and Mr. Michael Gold, assistant director of skills industry division. So specifically members on B3, B4, B10, or just B10.
Just in case they get confused.
The two men's regular enough here, I think, we know both of them, Heather.
Indeed, so we're going to start off with Brendan and B3.
Thank you, Chair. These savings relate to the Steps to Work programme, the predecessor programme to Steps to Success. The programme was introduced in September 2008, and the savings really started in 2011 after we got some information as to what was happening on the programme, the volumes going through, and so on. So we took a view as to what the levels of payments should be in respect of a number of activities. And if I could just outline really what the outcome of that review was. We decided to reduce the back to work strand from 13 weeks to 8 weeks, and that gave rise to a saving of 1.7 million. In doing that, we were very conscious of the fact that we were dealing with the different groups of clients from when the programme was first introduced in 2008. With the economic recession, we were dealing with a lot more people who were closer to the labour market, young professionals and so on, who perhaps didn't need a full 13 weeks, and there was a feeling 8 weeks was more appropriate. We did this in consultation with a number of stakeholders, and in fact the results of the change show that the same number of people found in sustained employment as a result of the 8 weeks provision. So that was something that we were actually quite satisfied with. In terms of the second measure of reducing the short accredited training courses, again we looked at the range of courses that were available, the pricing that was paid for them, and what were the appropriate levels that we should be paying in the department. we decided to introduce a ceiling of £1,000, but with the potential to increase that up to £2,000 if someone needed a particular course and there was a clear business case justifying that need. And as a result of that measure, we achieved savings of £161,000. The third measure in terms of introducing greater flexibility to Core Gateway was something that we were encouraged to do, because again, with the number of people being closer to the labour market, it was felt that a 10-day Core Gateway course dealing with soft skills issue wasn't appropriate for everyone, and if someone was closer to the labour market, a shorter period would be more appropriate. So we decided to reduce to 5 days with the possibility of extension for those who needed more in-depth training. And as a result of that, we achieved a saving of £90,000. In relation to the changes to the funding structures, we changed a number of funding streams to providers. Again, this was based on volumetrics. When we looked at the numbers that were going through in 2011, they were substantially more than what had been forecast in 2008. So because of the increased volumes, we felt that there was the capacity for providers to absorb less income from the department. So we reduced the qualification strand, for example, by £600 per participant. And again, the figures from NISRA demonstrate that there was no decrease in the number of participants availing of the strand as a result of that. In relation to essential skills, we again reduced by around £600 per participant, and again no decrease in the number of participants availing of the provision. In fact, there was a slight increase, and that resulted in savings of around £262,000. Self-employment, which again was one of the more successful elements of Steps to Work, although availed of by a small number of people. We again cut the funding by £200. No decrease in the number of participants availing of the provision. In fact, the number stayed pretty much the same throughout the period of Steps to Work. And as a result of that, we achieved savings of £171,000. And finally, the skills development strand of Steps to Work, which was introduced in September 13. We modelled the payment structure on the previous qualification strand, so there was a reduction around £350,000 per participant, and that gave us a saving of £1.25 million. So through those measures, we were able to achieve our target for efficiency savings in the year, Chair.
Okay. I suppose, Brendan, just in those reductions of the 650 for the changes for the essential skills, 200 for the self-employed, 600 for the skills development strand of STW, how many people are you talking about there being affected by those reduced fees?
Well, for example, in qualifications, we're talking about just over 500.
Right.
Essential skills, we're talking about around 500 as well. Chair, I'm happy to provide some of the detailed figures if that would be helpful from the NISRA bulletin.
Okay. Just point 5 there, you mentioned the essential skills strand to Steps to Work programme. Was that the one you said about 500?
Yes.
500 by 650. My miles.
Oh, sorry. I was talking about on a monthly basis. Sorry. Did you? Sorry. You're talking about cumulative.
Yeah.
I'd have to get you the cumulative figure for the period.
That's right. Because that's. I was trying just to get to those figures. No, you're okay. The back to work, and I know we've asked this before by reducing the 13 to 18 weeks. And the Core Gateway as well, but adjusting the time, you say you were encouraged to do that?
Yes.
Who by?
Well, again, it was from a range of people, including participants themselves. Whenever we did surveys, we spoke to the lead contractors, we spoke to employers. We tried to get the optimum time that people would benefit without actually locking them in for a period of time that wasn't productive for either them or the employer.
Okay, so it wasn't savings driven?
It wasn't savings driven. In fact, the savings was a spin-off of perhaps a good policy decision.
Okay. Members, anybody else, anything on that? Anna?
Can I just ask a quick question? I previously been lobbied by ethnic minority communities about including learning English as a second language within essential skills.
Yes.
Is it going to be considered again? I know at that time they was said no, it wasn't suddenly accepted as such.
That's something I'd have to take back and reflect on. So I'm happy to come back to you separately on that.
Okay.
I mean, because for these people, it is an essential skill.
Yes.
They learn English.
We would hope through Steps to Success that the providers will pick that up as a need. But I would need to double check what is happening in relation to that. So I will come back to you separately on that point.
Yeah.
Steps to Success has been in from what, October?
From October.
They haven't picked that up as a need as of yet, or?
That's what I'm going to check on before I give an answer. I'll come back. I need to check with each of the three providers, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Okay.
Okay. Number 4.
Thank you, Chairman. Our commitment from the two divisions to the overall savings plan was 7.5 million over the period, and we achieved that mainly through a change in policy in relation to our funding of adult apprenticeships and through the cessation of a number of activities which were no longer felt to be viable or worthwhile continuing. I can go through the details if you members wish.
I think, Michael, especially in the apprenticeship side of things, I think.
Okay. In relation to the Strategy European Employment Rights Division, theirs was simply a number of cuts that they accumulated together to give us 0.6 million saving over each year over the period. In relation to Skills and Industry, and the context with Skills and Industry Division is that we work with all businesses, encouraging training and supporting training both in pre-employment and in employment training. In 2007, we in Northern Ireland had a full labour market. The economy was booming. We'd had 10 years of growth, and we were trying to encourage employers to upskill their workforce. The skills strategy launched in 2006 had shown that we needed to upskill the current workforce, and as a result of that we came up with a policy by which we would open the age group for apprenticeships. Traditionally apprenticeships had been from 16 or 18 to 24-year-olds, and as a way that we thought we could upskill the current workforce, we decided that it would be a policy decision was to open it up to over 25s. Resultingly, we find that the numbers increased significantly, but they were mainly people who were already in work, obviously were already in work, being put on apprenticeship frameworks, of which the department was then paying for the full training. They were mainly in non-priority economic sectors, and also anecdotally we would see people going through the frameworks much faster but still being able to draw down the full amount of money. As a result of that, when we asked to make savings, we were looking at the policy that we had for the over 25s at this stage, and it was decided that we would reduce the funding. One of the policy options was to reduce it to zero, but the Minister took a decision that we would retain 50% funding for the over 25s in the priority economic sectors. So the savings achieved from those provided the bulk of the savings for the division for the overall plan. In relation to the other activities, we had a cessation of activities. In those days there were workforce development forums associated with each of the regional colleges So these were chaired by employers and populated by employers, and the idea was that it would convert local labour market information to have an influence on the curriculum and the courses offered by the colleges. We had supported them since 2006, and they weren't as successful as we hoped. We had supported them with a financial resource, so it was decided that they would be stopped. Some of the work we were doing with sector skills councils at the time, we also reduced or cut completely. We also then reduced funding from the career service with what was then the educational guidance service for adults, and that funding was ceased. And then through some of other activities which we had initiated, called Future Skills Action Groups, which again were working with employers to try and refine training offering, and also through projects, one in particular on STEM, through the Alliance of Sector Skills Councils. We decided that that hadn't been as successful as we'd wished, so we ceased that activity. We reduced some of the levels in terms of our own training, some of the levels of funding and activity in terms of bridge to employment and the customised training. And then finally, we cut a number of programmes, particularly around the management and leadership field, one of which was Leaders for Tomorrow, another called Meridian. And then the final piece of the cessation of activity was closing the office of the Advisor for Employment and Skills.
I think, Michael, I suppose the biggest concern looking at your figures in the Savings Delivery Plan up to date is the reduction in the number of apprenticeships and a high circa 12,850 participants down to 6,779. Is that 6,779 now the baseline that the Department and the Minister is working on?
I would need to check the exact number, but we're in and around 6,000 to 7,000 apprenticeships currently.
Right. So when we hear now of an increase, it's actually working from a greatly reduced 2011 figure?
The 2011 figure contained the over 25s, which inflated the numbers to over the 12,000 figure. Many of those were adults, obviously, at over 25. Our oldest, at that time, the oldest apprentice was 82. And so, well, absolutely. But in terms of the priority areas, they were not in the economic areas or the priority economic areas. So we were, and this was in common with what was happening in GB. I think it was being used, the process was being used to fund people training that was already being provided or could have been provided in a different way.
Right, so employers were abusing the system, is that what you're intimating?
Anecdotally, we would have seen people who would have gone through a framework which we'd have expected to take 2 or 3 years, going through, in one case, in 8 weeks.
Right.
So I know...
Pulled down the full...
And drawn down the full. So for us, the policy change was to try and improve the system. When the policy was opened, we thought people who had no training and no qualifications would have been put through the system, but that has, obviously an experienced worker will go through quicker anyway, but the system was not as we intended it, so the policy change helped address that. The Minister wanted to retain training for adults in the priority sectors, but his main focus was on the young people, to try and offer apprenticeships, and we still provide 100% funding for apprentices under 24 years of age.
Okay, Fra?
Sure, and I understand and pick up some on the internet and employers that do abuse the system and things. By and large, you know, it seems that in many ways over 25s are written out of the system. I remember a showcase in the Long Gallery, and there were people there who were bakers that they wanted to enhance their skills and go and think, but they couldn't get anybody to take them on because of the low level of grant available, as with the under 25s. Why is there such a distinction? And when we talk about long-term unemployed, most of the long-term unemployed lie within the 25-plus bracket. Why would we show such a difference? And obviously the impact. The other thing is that have we available to the figures of how many people would be impacted by the 50%?
Well, if I could go back and address the first question about those who are in work, who are over 25, we had alternative training provision for them. through what was then the Skills Solution Service. So through what we call customised training, an employer could say, I have a group of 6, 7, 10 bakers who need trained up to a certain level, and that service was there to get the training to meet the employer's needs and to get the individual's qualifications. So there was an alternative provision already there for the over 25s. So that wasn't we were drawing training for those in work over 25 years old. We were just steering them down a more cost-effective route.
Well, to see just on that, have we got examples where that has worked? And the reason I'm raising that is that at the showcase, I had actually brought the Minister over to talk to the bakers, and he gave certain guarantees that he would look into it, that he would, yes, said there was an anomaly here, and what you're saying is probably the complete opposite to what the Minister had said to the people in the showcase.
I can't talk about the details until I look into it.
You could, please.
But certainly the Minister has given a focus on the food and drinks manufacturing sector. He co-chairs a group with Tony O'Neill, who's an employer in the sector, a major employer in the sector, and chair of the Agri-Food Strategy Board. And the purpose of that group is to try and address the training needs, including apprenticeships within the food and drinks manufacturing industry, given its importance to the economy in Northern Ireland.
And I have to re-emphasise that this committee has been a champion of apprenticeships over this past number of years, but I just think it's a bit difficult to accept that it would have such an impact on the over 25s, and would be again interesting to find out certainly the other pathways that may have been in, because there has been a couple of people that has approached in relation to the impact that the 50% would have on them.
And I'll happily provide any information you need. But in terms of the unemployed, the apprenticeship means that you are employed from day one. Yeah. To be on apprenticeships NI, you have to be in employment. So that the steps to success and its predecessor steps to work would have been in the alternative provision for an unemployed person to get into work. We also have the Bridge to Employment scheme, which would be there to train people of all ages and give them pre-employment training to allow them to compete and be interviewed for jobs. And that's been a very, very successful scheme. I think there's over 1,200 people have been employed in the last few years through that scheme alone.
Okay, thanks, Anna.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to hear that the department review and then evaluate, the value for money of your spending. The Sector Skills Council, what sort of funding cuts are you making on them?
Previously, the Sector Skills Councils would have had a pot of money they could have bid into. And they would have, in those days, there were 24 of them, and they would have bid in for projects which would have maybe created a DVD to attract people into their sector. When we came to the point of looking at what was the impact of some of those activities, we decided that the money might be better spent in other ways. And subsequently, over the period of time, both here and in the UK, the number of Sector Skills Councils has decreased, and they no longer receive funding from government in the way that they did in the past. Everything now has to be, it's a competitive process, and they have to bid in for projects.
Okay. And are you still in partnership with them?
We encourage collaboration all the time with them, and still work with them in terms of labour market information. Some of the activities we have in the likes of the IT sector, the food sector, the advanced manufacturing and engineering sectors, we work very closely with the Sector Skills Councils on specific.
It would be a shame to lose that partnership with them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Sidney?
Thank you, Chair. I think you touched it right after, Megan. Closing of the Office of Advisory and Skills, what does that entail, and what savings is there effective there?
In terms of the financial monetary savings, it was over £300,000 a year. I think Heather alluded to it earlier on. There was a separate office, an estate, part of the Dell estate, was used by the Office of the Northern Ireland Skills and Employment Advisor. And they had a support staff of around, I think, 6 or 7 officials. So that cost was reduced by giving up the property, or the lease on the property, and then we brought the support staff into the department and provided the advisor with a more structured and focused support mechanism.
So you didn't really save on staff, you brought them, you took them...
They were redeployed within the department.
Redeployed, so it wasn't on staff.
But they weren't then solely working on his office alone. They were used for other parts of skills policy, for example, and they've been used there since.
What effect did they see that closing that office? Would it have a big effect on going forward? And
no, because we have just appointed, the Minister's just appointed Mark Huddleston as the UK Commissioner for Employment Skills.
I raised it with him in our question at the beginning of the week. So I'm just wondering, we'll still have that service going forward?
Yes, and Mark will be our representative to the UK Commission for Employment and Skills. So we still have
at the same time saving it's 300,000.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Okay.
Okay.
Heather, thank you and your team very much for coming along and going through that. So.
Oh, just want to remind you that my researcher was looking into your website. What you said in your briefing that the Dell briefing says the details of these savings can be found on the Dell website, but the link does not work. So she's advised you to look at it.
Thank you.
Yes, she left me a note to say that.
Okay. Okay, members, moving on to agenda item 8, which is the departmental briefing on the employment bill. Just highlight members for your department briefing paper, employment law review, employment bills, page 142 of your packs, and the departmental response for the employment law review consultation for page 146. All right, no, all right. Okay, members, can I welcome Mr. John McEwen, who's the Acting Assistant Director of Strategy European Employment Relations, Dr. Alan Scott, Head of Employment Relations Policy and Legislation Branch, and Ms. Margaret Ahare, Employment Relations Policy and Legislation Branch. John, over to you.
Good morning, Chair, and thanks to you and the committee for providing this opportunity to brief the committee on the department's plan to publish, first of all, its response to the public consultation on the employment law review, and to set out in broad terms then the main policy intentions of the employment bill. And if you're content, Chair, I'll briefly cover the background in relation to the employment law review and then provide a brief overview of the key policy intentions of the bill. And then Margaret and Alan and I will be happy to discuss and answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, John.
From you and the members. I'm conscious, Chair, that departmental officials have previously provided a detailed oral briefing to the committee on the employment law review on 4th of June 2014. That was covering feedback on the key policy issues explored through the public consultation. In September last year, the Minister held a round of meetings with key stakeholders to further discuss the outcomes of the public consultation, and the Minister also shared with the committee some detail on how he was minded to proceed with employment law at his briefing to the committee on the 10th of September. And on the 20th of November 2014 then, the Minister secured the Executive's agreement to the drafting of an employment bill and indicated the intention to have the bill introduced before the coming summer recess. So the review of employment law consultation sought views on a range of policy proposals under three main themes, and I just wanted to remind the members of those three themes. First of all, early resolution of workplace disputes, efficient and effective employment tribunals, and then better regulation measures. And in broad terms then, the outworkings of the consultation and the range of discussions and briefings since then are as follows, and I'll just run through those quickly. So first of all, the Department has taken appropriate primary legislative powers in the Employment Bill, which will enable early conciliation to be established, and that will make it mandatory for potential tribunal claims to be routed in the first instance to the Labour Relations Agency. Confidentiality provisions will therefore be extended to protect the integrity of this new process. The Department is also seeking appropriate enabling provisions within the Employment Bill to allow for a neutral assessment service to be established, where the parties to conciliation agree that the process could be taken forward, and allowing the LRA sufficient scope to deliver a process that would meet the needs of users in a way that learns from and builds on experience. The Department will not be taking any action to amend the unfair dismissal qualifying period in Northern Ireland. However, in the event that any future need to re-evaluate this position arises, the Department is seeking an amendment to the relevant enabling power so that any changes to the qualifying period will be subject to the draft affirmative procedure in order to ensure that a debate on this issue in the Assembly. Also, in relation to unfair dismissal, the Department will take forward a change in the legislation to curb above inflation increases in the upper limit of the compensatory award that a tribunal can order in these cases. The Department will seek to reduce the consultation period for redundancies involving 100+ employees from 90 to 45 days, and to remove fixed-term employees from the count for the purposes of collective redundancies. Again, an amendment to the enabling power will be made so that any future changes to consultation periods will be subject to the draft affirmative process, and again, ensuring a debate on the issue would be taken in the Assembly. There are no proposals for legislative changes in relation to compromise agreements and protected conversations. However, the Department intends to commission further guidance on what is often referred to as the management of difficult conversations in the workplace. And the Department will amend the law on public interest disclosure to introduce a public interest test in order to clarify that disclosures must be in the public interest. The bill will also be used to alter the effect of the good faith requirement in making a disclosure, and also to amend the definition of worker to include some health workers who were inadvertently excluded from the scope of the public interest disclosure protections. And finally, in relation to public interest, the Department will legislate for vicarious liability for employers in a situation where an employee who has made a protected disclosure subsequently suffers detriment from colleagues. I said finally on public interest disclosure, but the Department is also currently consulting on replicating additional proposals for reform on public interest disclosure. We often find that there's quite a bit of development in some of these legislative areas, and we are aware that there are some developments in GB, so we're currently consulting on replicating some of those proposals. In terms of additional issues, the Department is taking the opportunity presented in the Employment Bill to make provisions relating to careers guidance and to apprenticeships. And I'll just quickly explain our intent there. The report issued actually by this committee following its inquiry into careers guidance recommended that the Department should consider introducing a statutory duty for the provision of impartial careers guidance, and subsequent reports from the CBI have also endorsed this recommendation. The clause as drafted will introduce a regulation making power in relation to careers guidance, and is intended that regulations would be introduced as soon as is practically possible. The detail of the duty on the Department will be specified in the regulations, and it's anticipated that it will place a duty on the Department to provide impartial careers guidance delivered by qualified careers advisors. In relation to apprenticeships, the Department published its strategy document, Securing Our Success, Northern Ireland's Strategy on Apprenticeships, in June 2014. A number of projects as outlined in the strategy have been established to pilot and test the new model for the purposes of securing implementation by 2016. And our intention in the bill is that this will be underpinned through legislation with regulations to define the core components of an apprenticeship in Northern Ireland. Some other matters in relation to the bill. The bill does not include provisions on zero-hour contracts, and that's pending agreement of the Department's proposals by the Executive. However, provisions can be inserted via amendments at a later stage of the bill's passage through Assembly should such agreement be reached. And just a couple of other issues in relation to the bill before I close. In relation to tribunals, tribunal reform was the second of the three key themes that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. We want employment tribunals that meet the needs of today's users. And the last substantial review of tribunals was over 10 years ago now. Most of the changes here can be taken forward by subordinate legislation or in a revised tribunal practice or guidance. The Department will be consulting over the summer on revised tribunal rules and procedures with the objective of simplifying and improving processes. Our proposal is to include in the bill only some minor amendments which will allow the Department to amend regulations as appropriate in response to the public consultation when it occurs in the summer. These changes relate mainly to the terminology used for what are currently known as chairmen of tribunals, who are in practice referred to as employment judges. And they also relate to an important issue that will be dealt with in the consultation as to whether there should be changes to the current system whereby parties can be required to pay a deposit of up to £500 to continue with proceedings if their case is deemed to have little reasonable prospect of success. And finally, in relation to small and medium enterprises, as part of its better regulation work, the Department carried out research on how SMEs could be helped to better understand their obligations in relation to employment rights. We understand that some smaller employers without, for example, HR functions find it difficult to get to grips with sometimes complex requirements. Our consultation sought feedback on recommendations arising from that research and a targeted subsidy scheme, a mediation pilot, and we asked how information could be more effectively communicated to small employers. And while there was some support for the subsidy scheme and a lukewarm reception for mediation, the clear sense emerged that there was little desire to see resources diverted away from the Labour Relations Agency, which is a trusted body with expertise in both advice and dispute resolution. The Department does not propose any legislative action in this area, but is working with the LRA to establish how services can be better targeted to help SMEs. The Department is also considering the possibility of developing quick reference documentation, which would assist SMEs to understand their key obligations and responsibilities at a glance, if you like, with further signposting to more detailed information. I know I've run through that broad detail of the Department's direction of travel quite quickly, but I would hope that these proposals align with the Department's commitment to building an employment relations framework that is, I suppose, balanced, fair and effective. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm happy to take questions or to engage in the discussion.
Okay, John, I think as you said in your opening comments, the committee has been over this a number of times. It's something we have taken interest in. And I suppose from the outset, I welcome the recognition in the work that this committee has done and the legislation coming forward and actually legislating for the careers guidance and some of the recommendations that we made from our inquiry. So I think that's important to note that the work that we have done has been included in this. But can I just ask, in regard to some of the specifics you're going forward with, in the 90 to 45 days for 100 plus employees, in regard to, there's an exclusion for fixed term employees in that employee count. Why are they being excluded?
The consideration at the time, Chair, was that including fixed term employees was recognised as what was termed gold plating in the consultation. And based on those kind of responses, then they were excluded, as I believe they are in GB.
Yes, it's not something that's actually required under the European directive that underlies that, so I think that the consultation suggested that that should be removed.
Okay, thanks, Alan. In regard to the reduction then for 100 plus employees, the redundancy notice from 90 to 45 days, has that got executive approval?
Well, the paper to the executive in relation to the bill is currently being drafted.
Right.
So not as yet.
Not as yet. Okay. In regards to LRA and its increased role, I suppose, coming forward out of this bill, what increased the capacity will be provided to it or will be necessary for it to take on these additional roles and duties?
Well, we're currently in discussions with the LRA and they're seeking to put together a business case establishing what their additional requirements will be. There will be some possibilities of savings through redeployment of staff, but it may well be that there's a need to train up additional staff, and we are going to be working with them to develop a robust business case, which will then, on the basis of that, we will determine how it's appropriate to fund the early conciliation model and the neutral assessment. I think that one of the key things that did emerge from the consultation, it was that consultants were very keen to ensure that the LRA resources were continued to be supported. And in fact, in going forward, this financial year, we have ensured that the LRA resources have not been reduced despite cuts in other areas.
In regard, you mentioned, John, a £500 fee, that if a case looked unlikely to succeed, that would be payable by the person making the complaint. Does that not adversely affect someone coming forward who's either in a 0 hours contract, minimum wage, or low wages, actually been able to take forward their complaint?
Well, first of all, Chair, this is, that is an issue that we're bringing to the summer consultation then in terms of tribunals.
It is, and this is a provision in terms of that already exists within the existing tribunal rules, that there is the possibility of imposing up to £500 deposit if a case is deemed to have little reasonable prospect of success, and it's not something that tends to be used unless that applies, and it's not necessarily frequently used, and also the tribunals do have to consider a party's ability to pay in looking at that. So in terms of the consultation that will take place over the summer, we're looking at the deposit provisions as a whole to see how they're operating at the minute, whether there's scope to revise them, and obviously in looking at that we will be considering whether there are access to justice issues and how those can be addressed.
So that's not fixed as of yet, Alan? There's still a scope there to just in the last point, and it's in regard to the definition of a worker, which will now include health workers, and then further in this legislation there'll be protected disclosure subsequently an employee who makes a protected disclosure subsequently experiences detriment from colleagues. Will this change in legislation actually give further protection then under the changes of those two, the definition and that extension? Will it protect health workers or whistleblowers within the health service further?
That would be the intention, Margaret.
Yes, I mean the NHS workers should have been included, I think, originally, but they had got left off, so they will be included this time round. By way of protecting employees or people who blow the whistle, what we're intending to do is, at the minute, if someone blows a whistle, they can actually, some of their colleagues can actually, if you like, discriminate against them. And this was really to suppose, bring some responsibility on the employer, that they had to be, I suppose, really in the best interest of the person who blew the whistle, that there would be protections, and if not, if it was deemed that the employer hadn't done all they could to protect the whistleblower from people discriminating against them, that they would be held responsible.
This will actually strengthen those working in the health service?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. Anna?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just reading through about the unfair dismissal. Sounds quite complicated. We're not following the UK to extend from 1 year to 2 years.
Yeah, that's
right. But then we put in the legislation that there is a possibility, potentially, if we want to change, go through a draft affirmative legislation.
I think really what came out of the consultation was that there were mixed views, but overall there wasn't a great deal of appetite for the change. I think what the consultation was looking at was, if we were to change this, what would it do for the economy? Would it grow the economy? Would it reduce tribunal cases? Would there be inward investment? And there really wasn't the evidence. However, what the Minister was keen to explore, to say was, look, there could well be future evidence coming to the table. And at the minute, if we wanted to change the unfair qualifying period, it was subject, the power in the Assembly was subject to confirmative, which meant that we could have brought the change in and then it would have been debated. So it was important to give the Assembly the opportunity on such an important issue, potentially controversial, the opportunity to debate it first. So that was really, if there was further evidence, the Minister would consider it, but would open it up to the Assembly as well and give them the opportunity.
Okay. What happens then if it's a UK-wide company? So you have two sets of principles then for the employees working in London, for example, and Belfast. So, I mean, one set of staff would be subject to 1 year or 2 years before they could take a dismissal, unfair dismissal case. But here, then, we don't. It's kind of a bit out of sync.
Yeah, and it doesn't always just...
Not that I advocate it. Not that I advocate it. I have to make it clear.
Yeah, I mean, it is always a balancing act, to be honest. But I think the consultation also looked as well at, it wasn't a case of following GB. It was what was good for Northern Ireland. And the consultation did highlight from some of the consultees, look, we're devolved now. Should this be something, we need to have a solution that suited Northern Ireland, and we shouldn't always use GB, follow GB slavishly to bring in something that perhaps we didn't suit Northern Ireland, and as there was no evidence, we just couldn't, there wasn't the argument to change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just come back, John, it was in regards to the 0 hours, and I know the difficulties around there. You made reference that the executive may bring the 0 hours or under amendments.
Yes, Chair. Yeah, I was here previously with you a couple of months ago with Tom Evans and Deirdre Walsh on 0 hours, and we outlined our proposed direction of travel at that stage. And we followed that up then quite quickly with a paper to the executive. So we're still awaiting executive agreement on those proposals.
Yeah, okay. But if the executive doesn't agree, a party can still bring them in? If the executive didn't agree for those amendments, a party could still bring them in?
I'm not sure.
As amendments to the bill? Yeah.
Oh, in debate?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that would be feasible.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Hey, members. John, have you a timeline for us?
Well, we're, as I say, we go to the executive with the employment bill paper in the next few days, and we're still confident of achieving the deadline of introduction before the summer recess there. So.
Because I'm thinking now, from a committee point of view, it would be in our interest to have the bill in adjustment through second stage prior to the summer recess, to enable us to carry out our consideration. As you know, because of the extent of this legislation, we'd probably look at an extension to the committee stage.
Absolutely.
It's just to make you aware of that.
No, absolutely. We understand that. We are aiming for early June, but we absolutely understand your position.
Okay, members. Okay, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, moving on, agenda item 9 now is the departmental briefing and review of youth training, the way forward. It's at page 290. It's departmental correspondence, 293 is the PowerPoint, and page 74 is the departmental response providing summary feedback received during the stakeholder events. Can I just welcome Carl McGill, Head of the Initiatives Unit, Mr David Broadhurst, Review of Youth Training Branch, and Mr Michael Armstrong, the Initiatives Unit.
Good morning.
Good morning. Carl, whenever you're ready.
Yes. First of all, I have to apologise on behalf of the director, Yvonne. I think you've already got a message. She's unable to join you this morning, and she'd like her apologies noted. If you're content, what we'll do is we'll talk through the presentation that we've already shared with you, being obviously as brief and concise as we can, and then we'll open to questions. As always, we welcome your input and your comments. A little bit on the background to youth training. We recently completed the public consultation. We published the consultation in November, and we set out a range of interventions which serve as a blueprint for Northern Ireland's future youth training system. We had 26 different proposals, and they were grouped under 4 themes: the core components of the youth training system, supporting young people, delivering employer engagement structures, and ensuring quality. The interim report proposed amongst its 26 proposals the establishment of a new youth training system at level 2, broadly equivalent to GCSE, to deliver professional and technical training through a new baccalaureate-style award, which equals to 5 GCSEs, A star to C, including English and mathematics. All participants will have access to structured work-based learning, and it's intended that the new system will be open to all 16 to 24-year-olds requiring skills development at level 2, whether they're in employment, starting a new job, or currently not in employment. In terms of the consultation, I think you've already received you've received all of our feedback in terms of the consultation. Basically, we had quite robust stakeholder engagement. We had 2 roadshows with over 130 attendees representing 90 organisations, including employers, training organisations and awarding bodies. About 40 of the community and voluntary sector were represented at those events. As the views of young people are essential as we go forward, we spoke directly to 104 young people through 12 workshop sessions in Dungannon, Enniskillen, Newtownards, Lurgan, Belfast and Londonderry. These young people included a cross-section of experience. We had young people enrolled in entry level right up to level 3. We had representatives from a range of sectors, and I think again you've been furnished with all the youth consultation, both formal and informal. In terms of the formal responses, we had 61, including 18 responses from individual young people. Overall, the responses to the consultation indicated there was broad support in relation to the 26 proposals in the interim report. The majority of the questions posed in our consultation document received a high level of positive response, with all but 5 responses receiving over 80% of support. These proposals and the focus group feedback are things that we will take forward. We will take into account as we develop our draft policy commitments. And at this point, I will hand you over to David to talk through those in quite a bit of detail. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm just going to talk you through some of the draft policy commitments as they presently sit, and this is what's largely going to make up our final report, subject to change, obviously. The next 4 draft, sort of, as we call them, high-level policy commitments, are ones which we think reflected where we didn't get such a good response. So we've tried to adjust that and tried to, acknowledge that there was not as good response. Where it got between 65 and 80%. The first commitment that we have is, where required, young people will be supported to achieve what we call a full level 1, which we've defined as 4 GCSEs, grade D to G, including English and Maths, or equivalent qualifications. In terms of what will likely provide that level 1, the Department recently awarded a total budget of 20 million to 13 organisations through the ESF across Northern Ireland to deliver a series of level 1 interventions, which we hope will be able to make young people access and support their future progression in youth training at level 2. And the Department will work with providers over the coming 12 to 18 months with a view to ensuring progression and facilitate seamless progression into new youth training offer when it starts. There was also the Pathways to Success strategy, which has been in existence for 3 years and which has currently been reviewed, and it looked at skills for life and skills for work level 1, to try and ensure that those will reflect and make entry into level 2 much easier. In regards to the 4 GCSE at grade D to G requirement, our original proposal received a mixed response from stakeholders, it's fair to say. Some said it was too low, some said it was too high, some said it doesn't take into account equivalent qualifications. And one thing we have taken on board from that is that it should be as a guide. Overall, 67% of respondents thought it was a fairly good idea, but more as a guide and not as an absolute. It shouldn't be another barrier to young people accessing youth training. So going forward, this commitment will entail consideration of the appropriate equivalent level 1 qualifications, how best to ensure flexibility of entry, and still to ensure that the young person is able to achieve at level 2. The second draft commitment that we had was that youth training should be normally expected to take roughly 2 years. Again, stakeholder feedback informed our thinking around this, and again, people come back with the need for flexibility. For example, although we're still finalising what the policy commitment will be, we have been advised that certain sectors might not require 2 years, so it would be kind of nonsensical to keep them for 2 years when a sector will require. Certain groups, such as those leaving care and those with disability, require longer. And also, the young person at this age may face a lot of issues, and there should be provision made for interrupted training. That is to say that they should be able to take a break and return to youth training at a later date and continue their training. So we're trying to consider all that within that proposal going forward. The next commitment was for sectoral partnerships, and nearly 100% of consultee respondents agreed with that. And the young people also liked the idea that employers would set where youth training goes. Respondents were less comfortable with the idea that these sectoral partnerships should determine duration, structure and timing of work placements because of concerns that this would be micromanagement by ourselves, and that it would be consequently unresponsive to the needs of individuals and employers. So going forward, this commitment will make clear that any such guidelines for sectoral partnerships will be guidance only, high level only, sorry. Again, the next draft commitment was the central service, which would be supported by dedicated industry consultants, an industry consultant being someone who goes out, sources work placements, and being the liaison between the employer and the training provider. It was never intended to be central in terms of geographical location in our language, but it was very clear from the feedback that that's what people took it to mean, that it would mean, Belfast-centric. So clear messages have nonetheless been received for a local focus there, and it's something we're looking to determine how that central service will best do that, using the industry consultants to ensure that each area is covered. And it is not designed to override the excellent relationships that already exist between training providers and employers in local areas. So this commitment going forward will make clear the central service scopes to complement these rather than replace them. I shall pass you over to Michael now just to continue the draft commitments.
Good morning. David's focused in on the proposals where it was between 60% and 80% in terms of support, and that's where we've really looked at the feedback and looked at the issues and tried to adjust our commitments accordingly. The rest of the policy commitments in the interim report received between 80% and 100% support. However, that doesn't mean that there wasn't feedback to take on board and adjustments to be made on what our proposals were. So starting with the two key commitments on what the youth training system will be and what it will deliver, there's widespread support for extending the age range of youth training from the 16 and 17-year-olds currently able to avail of training for success to a 16 to 24 age range, and to make youth training accessible to those who are starting a new job, those who are already in work, who need skills development at level 2, and those not yet in employment. In terms of the curriculum, again, there was widespread support as well for the idea of a new baccalaureate-style approach to the curriculum that includes literacy and numeracy qualifications at level 2. In terms of the feedback from the consultation, what we're taking on board is some queries in and around the rules of essential skills and GCSEs, and we'll be looking to develop this in tandem with the refresh of the essential skills strategy and the piloting of curriculum throughout this financial year. Moving on then to some of the other commitments. Structured work-based learning, again, received a high level of support. In terms of the online technologies, that was very much supported. One issue with the work-based learning was the idea of work tasters for those who aren't sure of their occupational area before they start into a youth training scheme. Some of the feedback was that the idea of solely work tasters was a bit limited. Other things we could do are course tasters or talks from employers, as sending a young person immediately out into the workplace without some form of knowledge or skills development beforehand might leave a poor impression with the employer and might not actually be helpful for the young person to get an idea of what the actual work is like. Again, there was high levels of support for the careers service, providing impartial advice and guidance before the young person actually starts on the training course, and for pastoral support, including mentoring, to be provided to all participants. In terms of the other support elements, the financial support, flexibility for those with additional requirements, such as those leaving care or individuals with a disability. Again, the consultation showed that there was a high level of support for these kind of interventions. In terms of the disability focus, there was some additional suggestions to what's currently in place for training programs to build into our thinking on implementing the strategy. Also, in terms of engaging employers, there was high levels of support for the Strategic Advisory Forum and for funding mechanisms and incentives to promote participation by small and micro businesses. In terms of some of the other wider commitments, there's a clear level of support for clear branding and marketing. This was seen as an issue with the current system in that you have 3 distinct routes by which young people can access vocational training, and to try and sort of unify them under one clear brand for young people to access was seen as key. Also, there was high levels of support for the quality measures, such as a registration and approval system for employers seeking to deliver the work-based aspects of youth training. Some of the suggestions we'd like to take on board are the potential for this kind of register and approval system to be a quality mark for employers that they can then show as part of their sort of corporate social responsibility that they're getting involved in vocational training for young people. Also, there's high levels of support for the contractual agreement and for prescribed quality standards for providers of youth training. The next slide just just details quality standards for those individuals who are actually delivering the training, both the individuals and the training providers and the mentors in the workplace. Again, there was high levels of support for the tutors to not only have relevant occupational and teaching qualifications, but also recent experience of their industry, and some ideas in terms of how that recent experience could be updated over time. There's also, in terms of workplace mentors, support for having appropriate recent experience of the industry and to undertake some training as mentors. So one of the issues that was raised in the consultation that we'll be considering is the idea for small and medium-sized employers. It might be onerous for them to undertake training as mentors, so we might build in some flexibilities under that. And the final commitment there listed is for robust data collection, analysis and evaluation. One of the key things we want to do is bring together the current data systems that record achievement and progression under Mainstream FE, the Training for Success programme and the current apprenticeships programme, and to add to that with regular feedback from participants for their experiences of training and work-based learning. So I'll pass you back now to Carol just to cover the next steps.
Okay, thank you. These draft commitments, as you can see, represent the high-level policy direction for the new youth training system. I hope, as we have demonstrated, we're continuing to develop these in line with the opinions and views that we have received through our consultation and through ongoing discussion with the Minister. We are, however, working apace, and we expect the final strategy to be published before the summer recess. The final strategy will be written to fully integrate with the ongoing pilot activity being taken forward through the implementation of the Northern Ireland Strategy on Apprenticeships. Once the draft commitments and the strategy is published, we will ourselves move to piloting in this financial year, and that will look at workplace learning opportunities, mentoring and pastoral support, some of the themes we've mentioned to you this morning. We will want to move to pilot and test. So without any further ado, I think we move to questions, if that's okay with you.
Thanks, Carol. Bronwyn, I know you're keen to get away. Do you want to get in now?
That's grand, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, and I suppose it's really just a comment as well, and it's really for my engagement with young people. I think there's a wee bit of dovetailing needed regarding the economically inactive strategy, because there are young people out there who do actually want to go to work. They're categorised within needs. Some of them have been, for example, diagnosed as being autistic at 17, 18 years of age. And they do need that type of support. Some of them are sitting as being homeless, and that's their priority, which overrides then the whole area of education. So you've all these strategies, so we do need to be dovetailing, because it appears it's the same issues right across these three strategies: the youth training, economically inactive, and then the whole area of needs. It's the same issues reoccurring, but we're still not getting to the nub of the problem.
I think certainly when we move to pilots, there does need to be, as you said, a dovetailing with other strategies across the department. In addition to economic inactivity, we'll also be piloting United Youth at the same time as youth training, and we need to look at where young people could well fall between the gaps and need additional support to try to move this on. I agree with your comments.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Brian, thank you. Carl, suppose come back, I think if you asked everybody what their ideal programme was, this would be it. But it's the delivery of it and how realistic it is. And I'm looking at some of your draft policy commitments. Financial support will be provided to young people through a training wage or allowance. Now, this committee at this stage is working through concerns of the withdrawal of EMA from certain groups of young people. We're looking at the funding withdrawn from the BITES project and other projects. These words, although the great aspirations are ringing hollow to a lot of organisations and individuals that are out there at this minute in time, what reassurances are there that the department can deliver in any of this? You know, funding mechanisms and incentives will promote participation by small and micro businesses and encourage employment for young people in training. It's not tying in with what this committee is actually seeing being delivered.
Well, in relation to funding, the Minister has at several of our stakeholder roadshows, and as well he's on record in the floor of the Assembly as saying that this new policy area is a commitment. We obviously are developing this in very challenging economic times, and I don't wish to make light of that. But the Minister has indicated that this is a priority policy area, and it's vitally important that we move forward and offer these young people this opportunity. And it's important for Northern Ireland's economy generally. So in relation to funding, obviously we have the Change Fund secured for our pilots for the remaining of the financial year. And we also have, we intend, once the programme is fully rolled out, present funding for the programmes, that the old programmes, if you like, we will obviously pick it up and invest this into this new programme. So we are comfortable that despite the challenging economic environment, the funding will be found for this. And that includes, within our commitments, young people told us very strongly that they wanted to see a training allowance or an incentive on top of their benefits.
But that's what I'm saying. You know, the young people were here, with a number of young people here at our last meeting who were telling us very strongly that they wanted to see their pathways EMA continued as well. So what I'm saying is, it's fine unless we're not seeing it being put in practice at this minute in time. So I'm just worried that the work is going to be seen as another set of nice words or another nice policy that's going to sit on a shelf somewhere.
Well, all I can do is reiterate the Minister's comments, and he has indicated that this is a priority area, and he's indicated the funding will be found. We do within our strategy have a commitment to pay an incentive or a training allowance for young people. Young people told us that this was important to them, and our intention is, despite the difficult economic conditions, to find that money to ensure that they have an incentive for taking part in this training.
Yeah. Well, I'm not getting that used, by the way, but you know, you have to understand that where we're sitting from this side. In regard to the tutors who are going to be delivering this, if I can just find your... The tutors will be industry-based, occupational-based with a pedagogical qualification. How do you find people like that?
If I could refer to my colleagues.
In many cases, it's taking what's already there on some strands of the provision and just replicating it. So, for example, taking the requirements for industry experience from the apprenticeships and training programs, replicating that over to the FE side, taking the FE pedagogical qualifications and replicating that across. So there are ways and means of taking the best parts from existing provision in terms of the requirements for teachers and basically making that a requirement for the whole system.
Yes, but it's how you find, and I'm speaking from experience here with some other from constituency background, it's the industry and occupational tutors who then have to find the qualification, as well as how you actually get people who are industry based, have the industry knowledge, but also have a teaching qualification. There's not many of them out there.
Just again, drawing from the experience of previous exercises, one of the things the department has done is to set a time within which the teacher is given to get appropriate pedagogical qualifications or to get industry qualifications, so it's not a standing start. If they are lacking in the appropriate teaching qualifications, they're given a period of time to achieve them, in which time they can continue to deliver the provision. Or if they need industry experience, they can take time out of the classroom to update their skills in that area. And it's making sure that we have appropriate flexibilities in the programme, so that we're not letting people, we're not basically turning away what could be good teachers, good mentors, on account of them not on day one having the appropriate qualifications.
Yeah. Okay. In regards to the models or the pilot projects, what's the timeline for those, or where are they going to be?
Well, we have secured funding through the Change Fund for those, and they will proceed in this financial year. We're in the stages of scoping out exactly what they'll look like. So I can't give you definitive timescales, except to say we will be piloting in this financial year, so we'll be proceeding very soon after the strategy's been launched.
Will they be put out to call to organisations to deliver, or will it be a departmental decision where they go?
Another of my colleagues is working on that area, so I can't give you a definitive response, but I'm happy to ask that colleague to communicate where we are with that to you.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Tom, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, just a couple of things. You had 12 workshops and 104 young people engaged. How did you identify actually where those workshops should be held?
Well, we held, what we did first of all is we did a workshop with young people to ask them, would this be an appropriate way to carry out consultation. So we started working with Prince's Trust, a training organisation, and Belfast Met. So we looked at sort of what would work best with young people, and the young people felt that animation and discussion would be a very good tool. We then circulated to over 4,500. We have a mailing list of organisations across Northern Ireland, including training organisations, youth organisations, employers as well. So we did a mail shot out to all those organisations, and basically the ones that came forward are the ones that we delivered workshops with. We also, particularly in rural areas, we were very interested, for example, in going to outside Belfast, because there are particular issues, I think, for young people in rural areas looking for training that we wouldn't capture if we just, stayed within urban areas. So it was a case that we held an open call, and I think we had a good response from the young people. Just to share with you, because this was a pilot thing and it was a new thing for us to do, we did evaluate with the young people how they felt the workshop was, how it went, and our results were that 80% of the young people we spoke to found it useful. 95% thought the animation was a good way to communicate with them, and 96% of the young people felt that their opinion had been listened to. Now, we are staying in touch with those young people who we worked with, and we're mailing out to them this week again, just to sort of tell them, here's where we are, here's where your views will be published, because everything will be published online, and just to stay in touch with them. In addition to obviously our mail shot, we also did a lot of publicity as well in the newspapers and in the local press as well. So anyone who came forward and wanted us to facilitate a workshop, we were more happy to do so. Some organisations actually decided that they would take the animation toolkit and do a workshop themselves, and that was also, it was freely available online, and that was an option open for them as well.
Okay. Within your commitments, you have said that youth training will be available to all young people. between the ages of 16 and 24. Does that include, well, when you say all young people, is that irrespective of either physical or learning disabilities or difficulties?
Yes, provided they have a level 1, yes.
Provided they have level 1. And have you identified then any providers as yet that will deliver this training? Because if you have somebody, somebody with a physical disability, for example, and then for to go into a training place or place of training is more difficult for that employer or that provider or even somebody with a learning disability, because they have to have more mentoring and all. So, how are you going to cater for that?
If I could ask my colleague David to talk through in a bit more detail the pastoral support and mentoring.
Well, we haven't looked at the providers yet. What we're looking to do is to keep obviously the present, what is provided for those with disability, etc. But we've also taken our proposals and we're thinking of how to put disability specific. So when we talk mentoring, we want to actually put disability specific mentoring in there as part of the wider blanket for that. When we talk about the central service sourcing employers, we would like to also specify that also they should seek employers who will offer work placements to those with a disability. So we're trying to work out ways of doing that underneath the side where it would be disability specific.
Yeah, sure. It's just the fear that people with a disability could be left behind in this process, as has happened on previous occasions, as to ensure that in the commitments that you have, that it's, when you're talking about all young people, that is inclusive of all and bringing all on board.
We'll note that underneath.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Anna Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still fairly new to the committee. I am utterly confused by those different policies. So, is this an overarching high principle system to say that all young people at level 2 will get this?
This is going to technically replace training for success at level 2, apprenticeships at level 2 and FE at level 2.
Okay.
So it's bringing together
it
and
is
also
an umbrella scheme bringing, okay.
It's trying to marry it all up, because a lot of that provision is quite similar, but yeah, it's very confusing.
Yes,
People don't understand
totally.
what you get from that one, that route. So this hopefully will simplify the landscape for
So
you.
all of those will go? Yeah. And then all will be under this name, the training, youth training scheme?
Yes, at level 2.
Okay. And there's really, okay. I mean, essentially it is working, studying provided by the training providers. Then you have placements in work. Is that right?
Yep, that's
and then support career and then. So, I mean, that's not really much different from all the previous policies. So what's the difference? And tell me what exactly is baccalaureate style? Because I've heard about the term all the time, but I really don't know what that is.
I think the difference between this system we're offering and I suppose previous offerings or present offerings is that this opportunity will be available to all 16 to 24-year-olds, whether they're in employment or they're not in employment. And the baccalaureate is an award which will be equivalent to 5 GCSEs, and that is a qualification, 5 GCSEs, grades A to C, including Maths and English, and that particular award is something that employers have informed us time and time again. To really progress, to get into employment, young people need that as a starting point, and that's why we place quite a lot of emphasis on ensuring that the young people have that, because even for some traditional skills where you wouldn't have needed that as a starting point, employers are telling us more and more, like, we really, really need that as a very minimum for young people to progress.
And what's the name of that level? Is a name for it? Like previously you have the NVQ. What is the name?
Well, one way to think about the new curriculum is it's a package of existing qualifications, or it could be new qualifications if they become available and they're endorsed by employers. The key part will be a professional technical aspect, similar to an NVQ, and then numeracy and literacy qualifications, because it's those three key elements packaged as the kind of baccalaureate award that employers said were the key aspects of why they would employ someone, what they would recognise. And that on the numeracy and literacy point, what's new again is the focus on GCSE qualifications at level 2.
So you're still recognising GCSE?
Within the wider baccalaureate, yes.
And the baccalaureate could be different from one sector to another sector, like whatever, plumbing or engineering or...
Well, in terms of the professional technical aspect, it'll need to be to recognise the specific knowledge and skills from each sector to another, but the common elements could be the literacy and numeracy qualifications.
Okay, and then what, the additional one will be like the guilds, whatever?
Whatever the sector determines is necessary and useful to getting work in that sector.
So the young people, when they get into it, they'll know what is required of them?
Yes.
Okay, it is confusing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Anna, thanks. William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And touching on what the Chairman mentioned in relation to financial support, I think that's vital. And I do welcome the fact that the Minister has given a commitment on that. Currently, is there any financial support for young people in training at the moment?
You mean the present programmes? There is, but obviously they're not within my work area. Okay. So I'm certainly happy to ask colleagues to furnish the committee with that information, but I wouldn't want to try and talk you through, because it's not my work area.
Okay. The Vice Chair did mention the fact that it did say here, we're told that the support and flexibility will be provided for young people with additional requirements and individuals with disability. That's okay, but it's still quite vague, if you understand. I mean,
I think that is something we're going to scope out, for the next series of pilots, and actually, engage with stakeholders to tell us what, is required, what they need. Yeah. So at that stage, the flexibility is still there for us to go out and find out what people actually need. Because we know what the present system does, we know what our proposed system can do, but we need to really go check on that will work, check that's what people want, and also check, any things that we haven't thought of, basically.
Okay, so I think that's very important. Yeah,
it's very important.
Okay.
Thanks, William. Claire?
Thanks, Chair. And I suppose it's just to come back to a point that the Chair had raised about employing tutors or trainers. Is it the case that when you do that, the emphasis will be on their industry qualifications and experience rather than their, teaching qualifications, then with an opportunity to train on the job, like a teaching certificate or a PGCE FE? I understand that's what happens within the FE colleges currently. And on that, how successful do you feel that is in terms of their engagements with students, because they don't have that foundation in teaching? I suppose their focus is more on the industries.
We'll be looking to take advice from colleagues who work on that kind of FE model and what works, what doesn't, and basically take the learning from all aspects of how the department runs that kind of approach of gearing up experience and qualifications and build it into the new model. But there are different ways of going about it. Do you prioritise experience over qualifications? It's a thing we really want to scope out in terms of making sure that there's a high level of quality assured to the young person, no matter what arrangements we have for individual tutors to actually increase their skills or experience.
Okay, and just on the baccalaureate as well, if you don't mind. I know you've said you've spoken with the employers and they said this is the model that they would be most satisfied with. In terms of the employers who maybe wouldn't be aware of this, like I understand the standard is to get any job, basic GCSE in English and Maths. How are you going to communicate that to all employers so that they know this is an accredited programme and it's not just equivalent to a couple of GCSEs?
I think it is key that we communicate this to employers and make sure that they understand that this is equivalent and that it is recognised. Within our strategy, we have marketing communication as a specific proposal and strand, and I agree with you, it's absolutely key. And the young people as well, when we spoke to them, is they don't want a qualification that when they knock on the door of the employer doesn't know or gets confused about. So that is absolutely a key thing going forward.
Okay, Sydney?
I just quickly thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's pleasing to note, like you said to my colleague, that the workshops have taken place right across Northern Ireland, and particularly in rural areas. But the pilots that you talk about, I know maybe you don't have all the information on them at present, but will the pilots be carried out right across Northern Ireland in the different, well into the rural areas as well? Or where will these be taking place? Have you thought about that?
My view would be that they do need to obviously capture urban and rural perspectives. I don't have any further detail at present on where those pilots will be. As I said, my other colleagues working on that, so I'm happy to furnish that information after this meeting.
Give it consideration in a minute. That is an issue. The other thing is just, you talk about the providers and have to achieve a high quality standards. Who sets that standard and how is it allocated? Who says that's the standard we're looking for to any one provider?
Well, it's informed by the department's quality improvement team in terms of the existing requirements for FE colleges and for training providers, and so basically we'll be taking
Would be
advice.
equivalent to sort of that sort of
We'll
standard.
be taking advice from them on what best suits our model.
Has that started yet?
Yeah, it started as part of developing the strategy.
So when will that finish, or when is it ongoing for a period of time?
I think it builds into the piloting approach, and we ensure we don't pilot, or we pilot according to what we think the quality standards will be in the model, and then we learn from the piloting when the final model comes into place in 2016-17.
And there's also, sorry, just to emphasise, part of that sort of quality assurance is making sure, again, that young people's voices are heard, that they can tell us through the pilots, very, very key through the pilots, that we hear how they feel about the new system and what is working and what isn't working. So quality standards and listening and engagement, those themes, I think, need to continue.
Right, just to finish, the pilots, it's probably go start off with very few pilots and not be right across probably the province. You'll probably focus on one or two and not be, would it be right in saying this? To try and set standards and get feedback from those young people who are partaking in the pilots.
I will need to come back to you on that.
Maybe it's something we would be interested in,
Yeah,
see how that's all being set up.
It's just another of my colleagues is looking into that area and he's not here today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, and thank you for the presentation. I think Sydney probably hit the nail on the head there, and that is in terms of pilots, what's expected of them, and the aspirations of young people, and what happens if it won't work. And I'm not wasting that on it, because there's been quite a lot of debate here over a considerable period of time, and it was in relation to level 2s that were being offered by other education colleges, and what is the main difference between that and this. And when this was first mooted on the back of the apprenticeships that were being put over, that we may be underselling quite a number of young people that would aspire to apprenticeships, but because of this here the youth training thing may not be able to get it. First of all, what is the difference between this and the level 2 was offered? Because there was technical, there was people, employers came in here and actually told us that the level 2 wasn't worth the paper it was wrote on, that they wouldn't take people on that had a level 2. So I'm just trying to work out in my own head, what is the difference on offer now? And then kids want to go on to be plumbers, they want to do bricklaying, they want to do plastering, joinery or whatever. How can they get through this here? Did they get it? Because you're not weighing their aspirations to allow them to pursue that goal.
I think one of the key principles behind this is that employers are very much in the driving seat through the expert panel, through the sectoral partnerships. So in developing these qualifications, employers will have a really strong voice in terms of this meets our needs, this person with this qualification will be valued in our sector. So that is a key consideration in terms of making sure that the baccalaureate fits the needs of employers and is worth the paper it's written on.
What's the difference between the level 2 that wasn't offered the further education colleges and what isn't offered now? I'm just saying that there were people in from the technical the employers thing that just said it doesn't work, you know.
I'm not aware of those comments, so I would
It was made
probably
at this
have to-
committee.
Pardon?
That was the electricians,
Technical electrician employers that said that they don't recognise the level 2 wasn't offered, and then maybe this is completely different. but I'm not sure, because when it says level 2, I know that I think talking to like Youth Action and people like that there, they had grave concerns about the direction youth training was going on in some other groups. And it would be interesting to find out when you talk about the expert panel of people that were on it, if we could have a breakdown of who the panel was and what industries they represented.
Yeah, absolutely. We will provide that to you. We'll also take a look at the records of the discussion you have and come back on that. I'm sorry, without
no,
the
that's
detail,
fine. That's fine.
it's difficult.
Appreciate
I don't
that.
wish to mislead
I
you.
understand that.
I appreciate that. Okay. Carl, David, Michael, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you. Members, any other business? Members, if not, date, time and place of next meeting. The next meeting will take place Wednesday, 20th of May, 10 a.m, room 29, Parliament. So, meeting is adjourned.
29.